Looks like our speaker has arrived. Mr. Cates, how are you?
Not too bad. And you?
Okay,
Is that Peter?
that is.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I'm going to keep admitting people as they come in. I don't have any news other than what you guys get in the emails. Our newsletter should be out within a week and a half. There's a few people lagging in sending articles, myself included. Um, and then I'll be the speaker for the Called Shot lunch on the 18th. And then we have three in December, including Josh Gribson's great-grandson's presentation, which will be the first Wednesday of December. That was a snare by Mr. Ted Knorr. So looking forward to that one more than probably anything else. So Mr. Cates, do you need me to, do you have to share slides or anything?
No slides. This is a very, very low technical presentation.
Okay. Well, you can take it away and we can do questions. You guys want to do it? You want a question through the chat? Go right ahead. I'm here. I'll be listening, but I'll mute myself and I'll let our friend from Toronto enlighten us with his vast knowledge.
All right. Thank you very much. First of all, Peter, thank you for inviting me tonight. Let me start off by saying that it's been a long night for everybody. So if you fall asleep, I won't take it personally. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Maxwell Cates. I'm a CPA by trade. I've been a SABR member for almost 20 years. I was part of the steering committee for the Toronto chapter for about 12 years. And then after I gave that up, I started doing some consulting work for various chapters for their conventions. And then during a 2-year period from 2016 to 2018, Bill Nowlin and I co-edited a book, and that's what I'm going to be talking about tonight. So do you want me to wait for a few more people to get started, or do you want me to go right ahead?
You go ahead. This is recorded anyway, so anybody who misses it will be able to get it SABR site.
All right, then I will invite everybody to pull up a chair because it's time. It's time for expansion baseball. And tonight's story begins in October of 2016. And it was at a time when the Chicago Cubs were veering for their first world championship in 108 years. And the saddest of possible words became Osterer to Benmergui to Cates. Allow me to explain. Irving Osterer was the editor of a synagogue bulletin in Ottawa. And he had published an essay that I had written. And I'll just speak about that in a minute. Joe Benmergui was in synagogue that day. He read the article. He told his wife. His wife told my mother told me. And I said, I don't remember writing this article. What the article was about, it was about the first time, or I believe the only time in baseball history when a uniform patch contained an Israeli flag. A baseball uniform had an Israeli flag. And it was the 2003 Houston Astros. Now, that was the year of the Space Shuttle Columbia tragedy. And one of the 7 astronauts on board who passed away was Ilan Ramon, who was the first Israeli astronaut. And so they had the names of all the different astronauts on the shoulder. And next to Ramon's name was a little Israeli flag. Now, 2 years before that, I had gone to Houston to the SABR convention. And when this article was published, I didn't remember writing, I had emailed it to a number of people in Houston who I'd met at the convention. One of them was Jim Kreutz, who was a member of the chapter. And Jim wrote me and said, I remember meeting you at the convention. It looks like you've got good stuff. If you ever want to come down and speak at a SABR meeting, you're more than welcome to. Now, what Jim didn't realize is that when people make those sorts of overtures to me, I usually take them up on it. So Jim invited me to speak, and I spoke. And I did a presentation about the 69 Mets. And then next thing I knew, they wanted me to come back. So what do I talk about this time? Greg Lucas, who used to be a broadcaster for the Astros, who's a member of the chapter, gave me the idea to come up with a topic that combines the two cities, Toronto and Houston. And I'm thinking, well, what could I talk about that involves both of those cities? Maybe a biography of Pat Gillick. And then it dawned on me, maybe I'll talk about a statistical analysis on the expansion drafts. Of the 14 expansion teams, which one had the most successful expansion draft? Anyways, in passing, I mentioned this to Bill Nowlin in Boston. And Bill writes back and says to me, sounds like the makings of a book. I'm thinking, okay. So that year, the convention was in New York, and Bill and I sat down with Gene Ardell and a few other people about what goes into a bio project and the format that Bill had for this particular one. He thought about doing a section for each of the 14 expansion teams. And that each section would include an essay on the formation of the team and 3 biographies. And so one of the first things we did was we had sort of almost like an expansion draft about what players were going to be included. Now, Bill and I had 2 different criteria about who got to go in the book. Bill wanted to include as many new biographies as possible. And I think we ended up having about 70% of the biographies that were new. I had a different idea. I knew that photo rights were expensive. So I wanted to do as many biographies of players where we could get the photos for free. I knew a photographer in Detroit who owned the rights to all the old McCarthy photos. And he and Bill and I had made arrangements years before that if we ever wanted to use photos for the book, for any SABR book, we could at no extra charge. Now, just to give you an idea how long I've known Bill, here's a book that Bill wrote, Mr. Red Sox, the biography of Johnny Pesky, which was co-authored with Bill. And Bill inscribed it for me. I'm just going to read you the inscription. To Maxwell, maybe this will be the year, Bill Nowlin. He wrote that in April of 2004. Not too shabby a year for the Red Sox. Now, just by a show of hands, and I guess the people who I can't see can raise their hands and I just won't see them. How many people either have written for biography projects or have participated in them or even own copies of the books? A fair representation. I'm just going to show you a couple of them. The first one was about ball players in Vermont, which was done at the turn of the 21st century. This is an early one. This is the 67 Red Sox, Pandemonium on the Field. And I got a slightly more recent one to show you too. There's this one, Harvey's Wallbangers, about the 1982 Milwaukee Brewers. And so going back to the players and how we selected them, we wanted to get to use players who'd be interesting guys to write, interesting guys to read, and who were selected by expansion teams in the expansion drafts. And so we looked at somebody like Nate Colbert, who was selected by the Padres in their expansion draft. Nate Colbert, when he was 8 years old, went to a Cardinals game in St. Louis, where he was from. And Stan Musial hit 5 home runs in a doubleheader that day. When he was leaving the stadium, eyewitnesses heard Nate saying, "I don't think anybody else is ever going to do that in the history of baseball. Certainly not me." Wrong. Nate's the only other guy to do it. 1972 with the Padres. We had Pete Vukovich, who was in the expansion draft for the Blue Jays and later won a Cy Young Award with the Milwaukee Brewers, later still starred in the movie Major League. Mac Jones was the mayor of Jonesville. He was in the expansion draft for the Expos. We had Charlie Hayes, who was who recorded the final out in the Yankees' first World Championship in 18 years in 1996. And then we had some guys who'd been written in other biographies who were just Popular players, guys like Maury Wills, Gil Hodges. We had two Hall of Famers who've been selected in expansion drafts. One was Hoyt Wilhelm, and one was Trevor Hoffman. Hoffman by the Marlins and Wilhelm by the Royals. And then it became a question of, with the formation essays, what that is an essay about the formation of each expansion team. We had a few interesting experiences there. I wrote the one for the Blue Jays. For the Expos, we had 3 different people who said they wanted to write it, and all 3 of them had to bow out. And we were getting pretty close to the deadline at this point. And finally, I'm reading through one of my books on the Expos, and I see, holy smokes, there's the essay. I looked at who wrote the book, Danny Gallagher. My good luck, Danny Gallagher is a SABR member. I asked Danny, do you give us permission to use this essay for the book? And he said, absolutely, you're welcome to do it. This all happened on St. Patrick's Day. Just bear with me 1 minute. I'm just going to check my notes, see if I'm missing anything. We had some luck in some other areas too. How many people attended the SABR convention in New York in 2017? How many people went to the Mets game on the Friday night? How many people went to the ballpark session? My hand isn't up. I had planned to go to the ballpark session and decided to cancel. I rode the 7 train by myself. And standing in line to get in, I hear this woman talking behind me. She says, you know who's going to be at the game? Ed Charles. I turn around and I said, really? Is there any way I can meet this guy? And she's probably thinking, go away from me. And then I told her about the 69 Mets book that I'd written a few essays for and that I'd gone to Houston to speak about it. And then I was doing this book. So she says, okay, here's where you go if you want to meet Ed Charles. Anyways, Ed Charles was late in traffic. But while I was waiting for him, I managed to talk to this usher. Stan Manel was his name. He had been an usher for the Mets since the very beginning, since 1962. And to make a long story short, after speaking to him, I got in touch with the Mets and asked them whether we'd have permission to interview him for the story about the formation of the Mets. And they said, yeah, by all means. So Leslie Heafy, who wrote the paper about the Mets, she interviewed Stan Manel, and that was included in the formation essay. And one of the bigger challenges we had was getting photos for the books, getting the rights to photos. We had a budget of $1,000. And with the formation essays, Bill wanted to get as many as 5 pictures per essay. Some teams we had really good luck with. We had really good luck with Seattle Pilots. The same day that we sent out the request for photos, I got a reply from David Eskenazi, who's a baseball historian in Seattle. And he said, if you go to my website, tell me what pictures you want, I'll let you have high resolution graphics. We had good luck with the Astros sent us more pictures than we could have used, as did the Marlins. The Expos, we were able to get photos from them through the McCord Museum in Montreal, which is about the history of the city of Montreal. Some teams we didn't have such good luck with. We didn't have such good luck with the Blue Jays. The Blue Jays weren't too helpful themselves. We tried to get in touch with the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame. They said all the pictures were in storage because they were renovating. And then what happened was I was at a synagogue event in Toronto, and there was an usher who was directing traffic. And the moment he opened his mouth, I said to him, I know you, you're Elliot Wall, who used to work for the Blue Jays. And it was him, because I had interviewed him when I wrote my paper on the Blue Jays. And he was there with his wife, and I told him about the book. And his wife said, let me go home. I've got some pictures that I took on opening day. You can use them. And the one really strange thing with pictures that happened was with the Washington Senators. The issue was we don't know who owns the rights to them. I got in touch with the Texas Rangers. They don't have them. They're not interested. There was a beautiful coffee table book that they gave out at one of the SABR conventions about, I think it was called Washington Senators in Black and White or something like that. I asked the editor of the book whether we could use some of the pictures. No, he wasn't interested either. Tried different sites, different people. Somebody sent us a whole bunch of beautiful pictures, and unfortunately, we couldn't use them because we didn't know who owned the rights to them. Finally, I had a brainwave. Who was the president of the United States when the Senators became a team? It was John F. Kennedy. I got in touch with the John F. Kennedy Library. I told them about the project. I said, oh, sure, we got tons of baseball pictures of Kennedy at Senators games. So I had a look at them. I mentioned something to Bill. Bill says to me, how much are they? I said $26 a picture. He said, I'll let you buy 3. We finally had our Senators pictures. We had some good luck with pictures for the biographies as well. One interesting story, the one guy we could not find a picture of was Corey Lytle. We tried all the different teams he played for. We couldn't find anything. Tried different newspapers. Bill came up with something from the Minneapolis Star-Tribune where he's looking back like this as he's giving up a home run. He's wearing a green top on a really dark background. I said to Bill, we don't want this picture. Then I found a website for the Corey Lytle Foundation. And I called up the foundation, and it was Corey's identical twin brother, Kevin, who answered. I told him about the book, and I said to him, can we use your pictures on the website? He said, sure. I said, where'd you get the pictures? Do you own the rights? He says, oh, most of them I just copied off the internet. Great. There was one picture of Corey and Kevin together as kids. I said, can we use that picture? Who owns the rights to that? I said, oh, our grandmother took that one. Well, can we get a high resolution copy? He goes, what's that? Going, this is useless. Finally, Bill had an idea of getting in touch with Topps to use the rights to a baseball card. And Topps came back and said, oh, wait a minute. Corey Lytle's dead, which means if you want his image, you got to buy 3 more. Bearing in mind, we only had a budget of $1,000 for pictures. So we had all the essays written. We had all the pictures lined up. And we had a deadline of November 12th because that's when the book launch took place. The book launch was in Houston. Went down there, and I'll tell you about that in a little bit. But we had a few more problems between the summer and November. One of those problems is that we didn't have an editor, or we didn't have a web designer to assemble the book together. The person who normally did it had resigned. We were lucky. We found someone. Her name was Rachel Sullivan. She did a pretty nice job at the last minute putting the book together. Then, meanwhile, there was talk in Canada of a postal strike. So, how are we going to get the books? Fortunately, SABR, I was able to order them through Bill, who would order them from SABR, who delivered them directly to Houston. And so that was not an issue. I was supposed to have done another event the week before Houston in London, Ontario, and that didn't happen. Then we had the book launch. It was a Monday night in November where I gave my presentation on the statistical analysis on which was the most successful expansion draft. And the criteria I used were how long the players remained with the team, how well the teams did, and wins above replacement for all the players selected in expansion drafts and the players that they were traded for. Now, I'm going to ask everybody to turn on their mics when I ask a question. Mic's on, please. Of the 14 expansion teams, which do you think was the most successful?
Royals.
Well done, Francis. Kansas City Royals is absolutely right. They had their first year in the league was 1969. They had a winning team as early as 1971, and between 76 and 78 won the division 3 times. No other team came close. Some of their expansion picks, they picked Roger Nelson as their first pick. He had a great year in 72. They traded him and Richie Scheinblum to the Cincinnati Reds for Hal McRae, who remained on the team for 15 years. They just had some really good luck in terms of the players they selected and the players they were able to trade them for. When I did the essay, I thought that the Royals were going to be first and the Blue Jays were going to be second. The Blue Jays were actually fourth. Then after the statistical analysis, we had an expansion panel, which turned out to be more of a Colt 45s panel. We had Bob Aspromonte was there, whose biography is in the book. Larry Durker was there. Tal Smith was there. Tal Smith, who wrote the foreword to the book. And Jimmy Wynn could not make it. He wasn't there, so we had Bill McCurdy, who was his biographer, come instead. And they had a great discussion about the old Colt 45s. A couple things that happened that night, which I never thought would happen in the state of Texas. One was seeing snow. It snowed that night. And the other was learning how to speak English. Bill McCurdy was the editor of the Pecan Park Eagle, which, unbeknownst to me, I've been saying wrong all along. In Canada, we call it a pecan. But Bill McCurdy says a pecan is a compound word. It's where construction workers go if they have to relieve themselves. The pecan is the state tree of Texas. He says to pronounce it properly. So, but probably the best part of the whole experience, the reason I called the book Time for Expansion Baseball was as a tribute to Vin Scully. Because when I was growing up, we had the super stations, and if we were lucky, we'd be able to get the Dodgers on an East Coast road trip and be able to watch the game. And when Vin Scully was broadcasting, I would stop whatever I was doing and watch the game. At one point, I had hoped to go into broadcasting. I got as far as a sports show in St. Catharines, Ontario, and decided to call it a career. But Time for Expansion Baseball was a pun on his Time for Dodgers Baseball. But when the Dodgers and the Giants moved west, that's when they began to think about expansion. And after I had written the book, I decided, you know what? I'm going to send a copy to Vin Scully and write him a letter and see what happens. Well, I'll tell you what happened. Got an envelope from Dodger Stadium a couple months later. Inside, "Hi, Maxwell. Thank you for your wonderful book, which I will read with great delight, and for all the thoughtful good wishes from my birthday to Happy New Year. And the same to you, Vin." I never expected to have connected with Vin Scully from writing this book, but that was probably one of the highlights of the whole experience. And that's the end of my part of the presentation. If we have any questions, I'd be happy to entertain them.
Maxwell, who came out second and third in the rank of those expansion teams?
Good question. Third place was the Milwaukee Brewers, who began as the Seattle Pilots. They began as one of the laughingstock teams in baseball history. They were there only the one season, 1969, and spring training 1970. At the end of spring training, the truck carrying all the equipment and uniforms stopped at Provo, Utah, and were waiting for a signal whether to turn right or turn left, right to Milwaukee or left to Seattle. The next year, 1971, Frank Lane became the general manager. He made all sorts of shrewd trades. He got George Scott in a trade. He got Don Money in a trade. And those trades, Jim Colbert was another one. Those trades laid the foundation for Bambi's Bombers and for Harvey's Wallbangers, which from 1978 to 1983 were probably the most successful team in the American League, with the exception of the Baltimore Orioles. Second place was a surprise for me. Second place was actually the Washington Senators. And I'll explain why. One of the players they selected was Dave Sisler, a pitcher. And that year he was traded to the Cincinnati Reds for Claude Osteen. Now, Osteen had a couple good years with the Senators and then got traded to the Dodgers for, I believe it was 6 players, all of whom had a profound impact on the team. One was Frank Howard. One was Ken McMullen, Pete Rickert, Phil Ortega, Dick Nen, and I'm missing one. But it got 6 players for one, and those 6 players generated more and more players through the team's history, even after they'd moved to Texas. In fact, the last player generated by that trade was Gary Ward, who left the Rangers in 1986. They were second. Any other questions? Stephen.
Maxwell, who was the worst of the expansion teams and why?
Tampa Bay. And they were the worst because they finished last in every category. They finished last 9 times out of 10 in their first 10 years. The wins above replacement were lower on Tampa than any other team. And they and the players who were selected in the expansion draft didn't last very long and didn't accomplish very much in the time that they were there. Of course, year 11, 2008, was when Tampa Bay went to the World Series and they lost to your favorite team, the Phillies. Anybody else?
Hey, Max, you foresee expansion coming forward in the next few years?
Up until this year, I would have said no. Up until this year, I would have said if there's going to be team movement, it's going to be existing franchises move. And Tampa Bay and Oakland would probably be the 2 most likely teams to move. Major League Baseball has announced they've lost a colossal amount of money because of COVID this year. Anywhere from $200 to $300 billion, if you want to, depending on who you believe. And one of the things they could do to offset those losses is by awarding some new franchises. I think it would be a bad idea. I think it would water down a game that's already watered down, but they need to recoup their losses somehow. And I know Nashville's one city that's actively pursuing a team. There's all kinds of talk about Montreal. I don't see that happening. The same problems that existed in Montreal when the Expos left in 2004 haven't been resolved, whether it was the weather, the stadium situation, the television situation, customs, taxes, national unity. It's a mess. Some talk about Monterrey, Mexico, or Mexico City getting a team. There was a study done in 2005 about what would be the most viable city for a new team. And you know what they came up with? It's not one of the cities I've mentioned.
Wouldn't be, well, I'll just take a wild guess. Wouldn't have been Portland, would it?
Nope, not Portland.
Tokyo.
This continent.
Oh, okay.
Oh. Las Vegas?
Nope.
Charlotte, North Carolina?
Nope. Las Vegas would be interesting. I know they were always reluctant to move there because of the gambling issue, but now they have a hockey team and now they have a football team. And that seems to have gone over fairly well. No, the city that was the most viable for a new team, a third team in New York.
Oh my God.
Anybody else?
Hey, what was there more than one Cy Young Award winner that was in an expansion draft? I think you probably know who I'm talking about, but
was there more than one Cy Young Award winner who was selected?
who became a Cy Young Award winner later after he was taking an expansion draft? There was one. I'm sure you know who it is.
That's a good question. I'm drawing a blank.
He was drafted by the Washington Senators and traded the same day.
Oh, I know who you mean, Bobby Shantz.
No. He was drafted.
No, he was an MVP. He wasn't a Cy Young Award winner.
He was drafted by the Washington Senators and traded the same day to the Angels.
Oh,
Same
I do know who you mean, Dean Chance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And is he the only one? Do you know? Well, I don't know if there are any others.
That's a good question. I'll have to get back to you on that. There's actually an article in the book that Andy McHugh wrote about that, how you were only allowed to select a certain number of players from each team. And the Senators selected a lot from the Orioles, so they had to trade some of them to the Angels. And one of those players was indeed Dean Chance.
Yeah.
But the story about Bobby Chance, which rhymes with chance.
Yeah.
Bobby Chance was selected by the Senators as well from the New York Yankees and was traded to the Pittsburgh Pirates. He almost went to the St. Louis Cardinals. He was going to go for 3 players. The Cardinals had offered 3 players for Chance, and Washington turned the trade down. One of those players was Bob Gibson.
Oh,
Dave, I saw you had your hand up.
One argument for expansion be the unbalance of teams, the 15 and 15.
Yes, of course, if you expand to 2 teams, then you'll have 16 and 16. You could realign the leagues very easily. You could have 4 divisions of 4 teams, and have one of each make the playoffs or something like that, and it would make for a much easier schedule. You're right.
I could also foresee baseball playing around, since the leagues really don't mean much anymore, like they once did. They were their own entities.
Mm-hmm.
And this year, that's what they had to do because of COVID.
Right.
So that you had, they can come up with anything, the way that they're handling minor league baseball and all that. They certainly feel they're all powerful.
Well, I mean, you have the runners at second base during an extra inning game. You have all these stupid rules.
Yeah.
Which
that's a good rule for the low minors, though. But there's no reason why a guy who's just 17 or 18 years old has to go through a marathon.
Well, it's good practice.
Yeah, maybe.
Anybody else?
Unfortunately, I think they're going to keep that rule.
Pardon me? Scott?
Yeah, speaking of the new rules and all that, I was kind of glancing at MLB Network when I wasn't watching the election stuff today, and a former SABR president was on, Giamatti or something like that. I didn't really catch his name, but they asked him, which rules did you like this year? I like them all, and I hope that they all get made permanent. And especially the 7-inning doubleheaders. You'd like to see them, become a normal part of the scheduling and give a lot more days off. But I was a little surprised by that, because I agree that I particularly don't like that starting on second base during extra innings. Some of the other ones weren't so bad, but that was a particular thing that rubbed me raw. But I'm just pointing that out, that a former SABR president apparently loves them all.
Was it Vince Gennaro?
Yeah, that's who it was.
Dave had another question.
Well, it was kind of a reaction to Scott. So that Major League Baseball would actually charge separate admissions for 7-inning games?
I don't know.
I'm talking to this group that remembers full doubleheaders on Memorial Day and 4th of July, rainouts that were made up, and you didn't have to leave the stadium and come back in. As I said, MLB is capable of anything.
Yeah. Well, as I was saying before, they lost a lot of money, so they have to recoup it somehow. Stephen.
Max, you mentioned about the possibility of future expansion. Do you see maybe relocation as a more realistic possibility versus expansion?
Well, sure. I mean, the same cities that would be expansion targets could also target existing teams, like Nashville, like Las Vegas. I mean, I in the essay that I wrote about the Blue Jays, I talk about that, how when Toronto was pursuing a team in the mid-'70s, it first decided to go after teams that were already in existence. They tried to entice the Cleveland Indians to move to Toronto without much luck. And then they almost got the San Francisco Giants in 1976. And at the last minute, the mayor of San Francisco managed to find Bob Lurie and his partner Bud Herseth, who managed to put up the funds to buy the team and keep it in San Francisco. But otherwise, Toronto would have been a National League city, which is what Charles Bronfman wanted. That way that the team in Toronto could have been a good rival for the Expos.
Max, a follow-up. You mentioned about Bob Gibson almost getting traded. Now, I don't know if you had answered it, but was there a reason why the Cardinals did not want to trade him? Was there a reason why that they could not go through with that deal involving him?
No, the Cardinals didn't reject it. It was Washington who rejected it.
So why was it that Washington rejected it then?
Because they had another deal in the works with Pittsburgh.
Okay.
Where they got 3 players. One was Benny Daniels, one was R.C. Stevens, and one was Harry Bright, who never really amounted to much in a Washington uniform. Anybody else? Jeff.
Just another interesting point. Jim Palmer was exposed to the expansion draft in the late 60s when Kansas City came in. Jim Palmer was available to take, but nobody took it.
That's right. He was available he was available because he was injured that year.
Yeah.
He had missed the entire season, and he missed a good part of 1967, and they left him exposed in 68, and neither Kansas City nor Seattle took him. And did you know that in 1976, the Orioles also left Brooks Robinson exposed?
Oh, yeah, but that was late in his career, and nobody.
Yeah, he had one more year to go, and again, neither team took him.
Yeah, Max. As far as the expansion drafts went, I know up until a certain point, it was just teams, players taken from the same league. At what point did Major League Baseball decide to, no pun intended, expanded to taking players from both leagues instead of just one league?
The first time was 1993 when the Rockies and the Marlins expanded.
And was there a reason for that?
I think it was just tradition up until that point. I mean, the 2 leagues operated as completely separate entities. That I'm not sure why 1993 and 1998 were allowed. I mean, Major League Baseball as an entity that oversees both the National League and the American League really didn't exist until 2000. Up until then, it was always Major League Baseball consisted of the National League and the American League. No, that's a good point.
I was just curious because I remember, not as much as this, because I was old enough to remember the expansion draft for the from 77, but when I saw that they were taking it from both leagues, I thought it was worth a question. One other question I had for you, Max, was there anything unique or interesting that you and Bill found in course of with any of the teams or any of the individual biographies that came across, or was there anything unique or interesting that surprised you?
Well, I can speak on behalf of my own biography or my own work. And I wrote the paper on the Blue Jays, and one thing I found interesting there was, as popular as a team name is now, people didn't like the name at all when it first came out, but they loved the logo, and the fans were sold on the logo. I mean, that was one thing. One thing that actually happened when we were writing the book, Bill had written a biography of Ken Aspromonte for the book, which we ended up not using. Ken Aspromonte was supposed to be one of the biographies for the Los Angeles Angels, but like Jeff's example about Dean Chance, he was not actually drafted by the Angels. He was drafted by the Senators and traded to the Angels because they had selected too many Red Sox. By this point, we already had 3 Senators. So that was my mistake. Bill wasn't too pleased about it, but you live and learn. That he was the first biography that was written for the book, and we ended up not even using it. Anybody else?
I have a question.
Tom.
I missed the beginning. Of all the expansion teams, what do you define as the best player ever to be drafted and come out of all the expansion teams?
I would say Jim Fregosi, who was drafted by the Los Angeles Angels when he was 18 years old. He really was a franchise player for that team. He was an all-star several times. He won what was called the Owner's Trophy, which was like the Angels MVP. He was a candidate they were even talking about him being a player manager, which wasn't too much of a stretch. He became the manager of the team afterwards in retirement, but he had pretty high wins above replacement, but he was probably, of all the expansion teams, the best player to have been selected and to have played for the expansion teams.
I remember when I was a teenager, of course, I'm a longtime Cleveland Indian fan. They left, I liked a minor leaguer named Billy Moran, and they left him, and he was drafted by the Angels. Turned out became the regular second baseman of the Angels. In their second year, I think they won 86 games.
That's right.
He made the All-Star team.
I'd like to ask a question, particularly with you people in the Baltimore area. I've lived up there earlier in my life, but I had forgotten or did not, I don't know if I knew, I forgot that Brooks Robinson was exposed on the draft. What would have been the reaction, or was there one, in the Baltimore area when the Orioles did leave him draftable? And also, did Robinson ever comment about it?
Do any Baltimore people know the answer to this? Because I don't.
Not here.
No.
In fact, I was a year old when it happened, so.
I rather suspect people didn't know.
Yeah, I didn't know at the time.
The media wasn't as ubiquitous as it is today, and a lot of things flew under the radar. And people didn't care as much.
Did they even publicize it?
It's possible they didn't. It's possible it didn't even make the papers.
I don't mean just Brooks, anybody. Did they announce the whole thing? Everybody that's exposed?
I don't know. I mean, they certainly did in the 1993 and the 1998 expansion drafts. They gave lists of all the players who were exposed. But I don't know if they would have done that for the earlier ones.
We were able to find out who in all the drafts, who were the players that were exposed to the draft or expansion drafts? Or there's still some unknown secret of players who never be known to be exposed to the expansion draft?
Well, in one of the SABR convention magazines, there was a list of all the players who were exposed to the expansion draft. I think it was for Houston and New York. And there were some interesting names of guys who were exposed to the draft who didn't get drafted. I think one of them was Robin Roberts. The Phillies left him exposed. He had a terrible year with the Phillies in 1961. He ended up getting drafted by the Yankees in spring training and somehow ended up with the Orioles.
Max, you mentioned about who the best position player was. Who was the best pitcher to come out of the expansion draft?
I think I mentioned his name before you, actually, Trevor Hoffman.
Oh, my bad.
No, that's okay. No, he got drafted by the Marlins from the Cincinnati Reds organization. I mean, he started off as a shortstop, and then he moved into the outfield, and then finally became a pitcher. And he was actually the setup man to Matt Turner that first season. He got traded in midseason for Gary Sheffield, and it was to San Diego, and that's where he became a star. But who knew that two teams basically let him go? Funny story about Trevor Hoffman. The year that they opened up the new ballpark in San Diego, I went down there to see a few games. And if you've ever been to that ballpark, there's a sand lot right behind left field. And there were some kids playing there, and then Trevor Hoffman comes out and plays ball. Well, kids are lining up to take their cut against whoever was pitching, and Hoffman was catching. And then I go up. And then they said to me, "This is for kids only." And I said, "So I'm Canadian. We're not too bright out there. I just want to take one cut so I can tell my grandchildren that I played the game with Trevor Hoffman." And they said, "You're out of here, Grandpa." Anybody else? Dave.
Do you have a sense of whether I'm more familiar with hockey expansions than baseball, as far as Las Vegas and Seattle are going to do real well, the most recent ones.
Yeah.
But at the beginning, when they expanded, it was rigged so that these teams took a long time before they became good. Was there a development in baseball about, I'll use quotes, fairness, because it's a subjective term, but that they gave more recognition to the expansion teams getting somewhat decent players?
I think there was a better chance of expansion teams getting better players as the drafts wore on. That in the early years, it was basically whatever players the teams didn't want, that's who got selected.
Right.
In fact, the first year of the Angels, they were predicting they wouldn't even win 50 games. They won 70, which is the most any expansion team has ever won. One thing that's really changed the way expansion teams are run is the advent of free agency. Free agency came into the league the year that the Mariners and the Blue Jays expanded. They didn't select any free agents. The Rockies and the Marlins did. And of course, the Rays and the Diamondbacks did. And the Diamondbacks, their second year, they loaded up the team with free agents. Their second year, they won 100 games.
Does it cost more in constant dollars to be an expansion team now than it was then?
Yeah. The last time that they expanded in 1998, the franchise fee was $140 million. And the reason they set that price was Major League Baseball was involved with a collusion lawsuit at that time, where they were on the hook for $280 million. So the two new teams basically paid for that lawsuit.
I was in New York when the Mets came in, and they got a bad team, but they were a lot of fun. Yeah. And that was the Yankees, but it was fun to have Mets. Them. Yeah, that the case. The big mistake was winning the World Series in '69, because after that they didn't do well and it wasn't fun anymore.
Well, they stayed good for a few years after that. I mean, 72 they probably had as good a chance as any. The trouble is Rusty Staub got injured. And then the Mets did a great job at trading away so many good young players at that time to get the veteran presence who they needed to put them over the top, which didn't help.
Well, they did get.
I don't mean they were bad, but
sorry,
they did get to the series in '73.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, with a record of 82 and 79.
Yeah.
No, what I'm saying from a fan's perspective, you could tolerate. It was. The bad teams at the beginning were more tolerable because they were fun, and all the stories of Marvelous Martin Thornberry and Casey Stengel being interviewed and all that. Afterwards, you're not as accepting of not winning. Your expectations probably changed a lot.
100%.
Hey, Max, you mentioned about the cost of the most recent expansion. What was the cost of the original teams that were involved in the 1961 and 1962 expansions?
In terms of the real value of money, they probably weren't that different. A ballpark, I think it would have been around $10 million. I know for 1968, when the Expos came into the league, it was 10 payments of $1.1 million, so $11 million was the franchise fee. 1960, 61, I don't think it would have been much less than that.
Tom here, this got me thinking about expansion in the history of baseball. Back in the 1800s, there were several leagues National League, American Association. Teams came in and out all the time. Was there any expansion fees they had to pay back then, or that's a virgin territory for somebody to research?
I think there may be a book in there for somebody else. We were only looking at the modern expansion. We weren't looking at 19th century, although that would be a fascinating area to research.
Have another historical point that struck my attention. Of course, I'm a longtime Indian fan, and I was sure this being the 100th anniversary of the Indians winning the first American League pennant and World Series in their history, thanks to the Black Sox being suspended for the last month or so of the 1920 season. Historical fact, the White Sox, in I think it was about 1915, wanted to trade for Ray Chapman, the Indians' slick fielding, good hitting, probably future All-Star and Hall of Famer shortstop, who, of course, was killed by the pitch by Carl Mays. The White Sox was lobbying heavily in the Indians owner at the time to trade for Ray Chapman. The owner refused, but I think later in the year, and it may have something to do with the demise of the Federal League or whatever, he did wind up trading Shoeless Joe to the White Sox. Query, for historical purposes, if Chapman had been traded to the White Sox and the Indians had kept Shoeless Joe, would Shoeless Joe be in the Hall of Fame, and would there never been a Black Sox scandal?
Sounds like a good revisionist historical novel one could write. I mean, I don't know if anybody's read Ralph Pelusso's novel, but he's a Yankees fan in Virginia, and he wrote a novel on a similar theme, and that is what would have happened if Babe Ruth had remained a pitcher. And to give you a clue, the name of the novel is 512. But I've got a question for you, talking about the Indians of that era. Addie Joss is in the Hall of Fame. Why isn't Ray Chapman?
We all wonder that too. And the Chapman family history was terrible, really terrible. He had married over the previous winter the daughter, her last name was Daly, the daughter of the president of the East Ohio Gas Company. And 1920 was, everybody figured out it was going to be his last year because he was going to move in and to a business career with the family connections he developed. He grew up, I think, came from a coal miner's family in West Virginia. So one of the issues being discussed now in the Greater Cleveland area is, why hasn't Ray Chapman been inducted in the Hall of Fame? The answer was his career wasn't long enough. But in hindsight, there's a lot of other players who, let's say, I think his rookie year was about 1912 or so. So he had 8 or 9 good years. We think he should be in the Hall of Fame.
Well, that's why I asked the question about Addie Joss. His career was the same length as Ray Chapman's.
I think I can possibly answer that, Max.
Okay.
I remember in the late 70s when Joss, when it came up, with the year he was inducted in 78, I believe there was a rule up to that point. Players only had to play 10 championship seasons, and I forgot who it was at the Hall of Fame, but there was enough of a case that was made because Joss was, got sick and could not play his 10th year, and we never know what would happen there. But I think they made a special rule specifically for someone in that circumstance. But I can't remember where, what the details were, but I think that was specifically, I think there was just some unique aspect about Joss that there was enough of a case made for that. I think the long way of answering that question, basically.
Well, to play devil's advocate, it was difficult for Chapman to have played his 10th season too.
Right, and Joss died of tuberculosis. He was from Wisconsin. His wife was from Toledo, and he lived in Toledo off season. And the story goes that he may have contracted it in a pool hall that either, I don't know whether he owned it or somebody else did, during that winter before that spring. And what's interesting is probably one of the first Major League All-Star games was a fundraiser that all the Major League players had after he died to raise money for his funeral and for his family. And all the stars in 1911 played in that game.
And what uniform was Ty Cobb wearing in that game?
Cleveland.
Yes. Very good.
Yeah, Max, what I wanted to ask about was how much Continental League, which you had some of those teams that did become part of the first expansion classes. Can you tell us about how their failure, the threat of the Continental League, played a role in the early expansion?
Well, the failure of the Continental League was directly related to the first expansion. The expansion was considered the natural conclusion of the Continental League. That if you go back even further, in 1952, the classification of the Pacific Coast League had been changed from AAA to Open, which left open the possibility that it could become a major league. Now that dream was short-lived because, as we know, in 1957, the Dodgers and the Giants moved west to California. How are you going to have a Pacific Coast League in the major leagues with no San Francisco team and no Los Angeles team? And meanwhile, with only one team in New York, that was the impetus for the Continental League. That was Branch Rickey's idea. They had teams going to New York, the Twin Cities, Houston. I think Buffalo was going to get a team. Dallas Fort Worth was going to get a team. Buffalo is the only city, by the way, that was going to get a team in the Continental League that still doesn't have a major league team. And I think it was either poorly funded or poorly executed, but the Continental League folded before they even had a chance to play a game. And then 1960 at the winter meetings in December, they had made the decision to expand two teams to begin playing in April. They only had 4 years to prepare for the new teams. And then the National League followed suit the following year.
Max, wasn't Toronto one of the teams that was considered for the Continental League had it gone through?
Yes, it was. In fact, Jack Kent Cook bought the Toronto Maple Leafs to use it as a vehicle to get a major league team to come to Toronto. And there were I think 4 teams that he pursued. One was the Philadelphia Athletics, who moved to Kansas City. One was the St. Louis Browns, who moved to Baltimore. One was the Boston Braves, who moved to Milwaukee. And one was the Detroit Tigers, who didn't go anywhere. And when the Continental League failed, Jack Kent Cook gave up the team. And that was the beginning of the end of minor league baseball in Toronto. It ended up being sort of a co-op team, a not-for-profit organization began running it, and it was very poorly funded. 1967, there was a fire in the stadium they couldn't afford to repair properly, and at the end of the season, they ended up being sold to a developer in Louisville, Kentucky, and that's where they went. Anybody else?
I'll mention something that's a little off target, but Max has a real good article in the latest Houston SABR newsletter that came out perhaps today, and get a chance to read it. It's Verlander's hat trick no-hitter there in Toronto.
Thank you very much, Scott. That was a pleasant surprise seeing that in my inbox today. And the other article that I found intriguing, which I look forward to reading, is Bill Brown, who was a broadcaster for the Astros for many years. He was with the Cincinnati Reds before that. He wrote about his memories of Tom Seaver when Seaver pitched for the Reds. But what happened with that game was it was a Sunday game. I had tickets to the game. And I woke up that morning knowing Verlander was going to pitch. And I thought to myself, Verlander is one of those guys who's capable of pitching a no-hitter every time he goes out there. But I know he's not going to pitch one today. And here's why. Verlander has already pitched one no-hitter in Toronto against the Blue Jays. Nobody has ever thrown two no-hitters against the same team on the road. Well, at the time that I made that statement, it was true. But by the time the day was over, it was no longer true, because Verlander did, in fact, pitch a no-hitter that day against the Blue Jays. And midway through the game, I can remember turning to my friend and telling him, you see anything interesting on the scoreboard? Well, if you see it, don't say it. And at that point in the game, it was the fourth inning, no Blue Jays hitter had reached base on a hit. And Houston didn't have
the
any runs
Astros weren't doing too much hitting either until Toro got on there.
Well, that's what I was about to say, is that Houston didn't score any runs either. That bottom of the ninth, 2 out, there was a runner on third. Abraham Toro, who's batting something like 179, comes to the plate. Abraham Toro was a Canadian. He's from the Montreal area. And he hits a towering 2-run home run just down the foul line. And that made the difference in the game. And Verlander was not sharp in the bottom of the ninth. He could have just as easily lost the game. It looked like the possibility that Verlander could have pitched a no-hitter and lost the game, something that very few people in baseball have done. Ken Johnson was one for the Houston Colt 45s. Andy Hawkins pitched a no-hitter and lost. I'm not sure if it was a full game, though. But it looked like it could have gone that way. Thank you, Scott. Thank you for bringing that up.
Well,
Tom.
I've seen one no-hitter in my life, and that was Labor Day 1990-91.
Dave Stieb.
The old Cleveland Stadium. The Dave Stieb threw it. There were about 25,000 people in the stands, 20,000 from Toronto.
Not surprised.
And back then you could sit in the center field bleachers for $1. So the ninth inning, I went around and down behind home plate because I'm thinking, hey, this is a historic occasion that I got to be a part of and get a close-up view of. And I'll never forget that Steve pitched a no-hitter.
That's great.
I forgot what the score of the game was, but it's the one and only no-hitter I've personally seen. I saw on TV Sonny Siebert throw a no-hitter against the Washington Senators, and I think it was about 66 when I graduated from George Washington University, and I was staying in a dorm over the summer before I started law school. So that's my claim to fame.
Sonny Siebert almost threw another no-hitter for the Red Sox later in his career, and it was broken up by a hit by Horace Clark in the ninth inning. And Sonny Siebert was one of 3 pitchers to have ninth inning no-hitters broken up by Horace Clark that same month.
Amazing.
One was Jim Rooker and one was Joe Niekro.
Actually, Max, there was a Horseside trivia question. I think it was one of the questions came up yesterday. The answer was Tommy Bridges, who carried multiple no-hitters deep into games, but could never achieve it.
Well, Mike Messina did that a lot for the Orioles when he was pitching.
I remember he did that for the Yankees once, too.
Cesar Tovar broke up 2 Oriole no-hitters in the same season in the ninth inning.
Oh, I didn't
Mike
know
Cuellar
that.
and Dave McNally.
Who were the pitchers?
Cuellar and McNally. And I think he did it to another pitcher on another team, too.
Anybody else, guys? Questions, comments? A little after 8 for all of us on the East Coast.
Well, Peter, the last lunch meeting we had about a week and a half ago.
Yeah.
I forgot all about it. At 1:15, I tried to zoom in and log on, but I couldn't get on. And I'm not really technically proficient on this, so I don't know whether it was because you can't get on once a meeting starts, or maybe you guys already had finished up.
We might have finished. I can't remember the time, but if you want the link to the presentation, I can email it to you.
Okay.
Hey, Max?
Yep.
You talk about the cover, because I had picked up the book myself in preparation for this, for your presentation.
Well, thank you.
Can you go into some of the, the pictures that you used?
Oh, of course. Of course. Here's the cover. And I'll just hold it up to the screen while I answer the question. There is a message to this cover. And the message is the expansion of baseball was the combined effort of players, owners, and politicians. These were the Houston Colt 45s on their first road trip. There's Ewing Kauffman at a Royals game the first season with Stan Musial. And this up here, that's Jean Drapeau. He was the mayor of Montreal when the Expos became a team. But there's actually a second message to this cover. There's a second message. And that is my own personal baseball journey. Starting with the Expos. I grew up in Ottawa. The Expos were the closest major league team. We used to go to Expos games and then later Ottawa Lynx games when they were the AAA team. I can remember the Expos coming to Ottawa for their caravan. One year it was on the Rideau Canal in the middle of winter, and some of the players tried skating. They tried playing hockey. Tom Foley says, "What am I doing? I'm a Georgia boy. I've never skated before in my life." And then this picture down here, believe it or not, is supposed to represent Toronto. And you're probably wondering, what does Ewing Kauffman have to do with Toronto? His wife's from here, Muriel Kauffman. In fact, across the street from here is the Toronto Transit Commission headquarters, and it's housed in the Frederick McBrien building, who was her uncle. And his last picture is Houston. In the city of Houston and the baseball community there, without them, this book probably never would have existed. That we had help from 23 different members of the Houston SABR chapter, from not just SABR, but also from the Pecan Park Eagle, from Hal Smith Enterprises, and the Astros. So it was just the trajectory of, I'd say my baseball journey, but that's the name of Bill Brown's book, who's also a member of the Houston chapter. If you're interested in the book, there's a couple places where you can buy it. One is on the SABR website. If you're a SABR member, you get 50% off. And you can also buy it on Amazon. And I think the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame still has a few copies that I've signed.
Hey, Max, I have a question about when we were in Houston for the SABR, we took a side trip to Sugarland to see a game.
Skeeters.
And Skeeters. And Tal Smith was the tour guide.
Oh, yeah?
And I read that Sugarland now will have a minor league team, and it will no longer be an independent team. Do you have any information on that and how that all took place?
I'm just learning about it tonight, to be honest with you.
Okay. All right. Does anybody in the audience have any information on that? Okay. Thanks.
I probably should, but I don't. I do know that during the pandemic, the Skeeters Constellation Field hosted a bunch of minor league games, and people came in, and Roger Clements was instrumental in his kids. Two of his kids played, and one managed, and he was there kind of in the background helping things out. But they got about 4 teams that played fairly regularly down there in an open air stadium during the summer in Houston, which is not the easy thing to do.
Well, I did hear that mentioned about Sugarland being a minor league team. It's part of the restructuring of the minor leagues they're talking about.
Correct.
I didn't think anything is for sure yet about any of that.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Scott.
Yep.
And Jeff.
I have a question. What's a skeeter?
Mosquito.
Yes.
Mosquito.
Yeah, it's short for mosquito.
Yeah.
But plenty of them down here.
Who was telling at the Houston convention? One of the players was telling about how bad the mosquitoes were in the old ballpark before the Astrodome.
Oh, that would have been on the Colt 45s panel. That
Yeah.
was,
Yeah.
I think it might have been Carl Warwick.
It
Bob
sounded
Astromonte.
horrible the way he was talking about it.
Well, we have a mosquito mister on the outside of our back patio that every day, 3 times a day, mists for mosquitoes and gets rid of them. Otherwise, we probably couldn't live outside.
Tom.
Oh, it's, you're a Toronto native or Canada. When's the last time? The question I have is hockey.
Yes.
Growing up in Cleveland back in the 50s, we would get on rabbit ears, we could pick up channel from the TV station from London, Ontario, and we would watch Hockey Night Canada every Saturday night because the Maple Leafs goalie was Johnny Bauer.
That's right.
A great goalie for the Cleveland Barons American Hockey League team in the 50s. And my uncle used to take my brother and I to the Old Cleveland Arena to watch the Barons. So I remembered and rooted for the Maple Leafs winning the Stanley Cup in, what was it, 64, 65, and 67, and they haven't done it since.
Not since 67. 64, I think Bobby Baughan scored the winning goal of the Stanley Cup with one broken leg.
And I remember they finished 4th in the 16 division, but in the playoffs, they won the Stanley Cup a couple times.
That's right. They finished 4th in 67.
Yeah.
And that was, as you said, the last time they won the Stanley Cup. And I mean, the Leafs have a peculiar business model. They sell out no matter what. So they make more money when they lose than when they win.
They have no incentive to put together a great team.
Little incentive.
As a Philadelphia Flyers fan, what will it take for the Maple Leafs to finally break its streak?
Pardon me?
What will it take for the Maple Leafs to finally win the Stanley Cup?
Oh, that question's been asked by many people, and books have been written, and they've had panel discussions. I don't think there's any answer to that question, I'm afraid.
I know you got Austin Matthews there. I know he's a very good ball player.
Yes.
It just mystifies me because I think one of the few other teams on that, because I'm a Flyers fan.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I know I've been waiting for about 45 years for mine. And I know it's just out of curiosity because I watch hockey myself, and it just befuddles me as, given all the great players that have played for them over the years, how they've not managed to win the Stanley Cup since the league expanded, since we're all subject of expansion.
Not only not won the Stanley Cup, they haven't even been to the Stanley Cup since then. That they made it as far as the semifinals a couple times. I think 78, 79 when they lost to the Islanders, or no, the Rangers rather, and then the early 90s they lost to the Los Angeles Kings when people were accusing the refs of giving Wayne Gretzky favoritism. And then the late 90s they played the Buffalo Sabres a couple times in the semifinals, but they never made it beyond that. And
am I pronouncing Sean Inouye? Is that how the writer Down Goes Brown? Have you ever? Down Goes Brown. It was a book. His last name is Ionoue, something like that. But he's a very clever writer, and from Toronto.
Yes.
And if they ever won the Stanley Cup, he'd have nothing to write about because he's a diehard Maple Leafs fan.
Not familiar with that. I'll have to look that up.
Yeah. Let me.
Just tell me
You get the Athletic?
Blue Jays... Go ahead.
I'm just saying, if you he's in the Athletic. If you ever subscribe to that.
When the Blue Jays baseball team came into existence, was there an initial idea to name them the Maple Leafs?
Well, there was a name the team contest. And there were something like 30,000 different applications that were submitted. And Blue Jays was the winning submission. I think one of the reasons why they picked it was because of the word blue. That the broadcast sponsor was Labatt's. And a few years earlier, they had changed the name of their beer from Labatt's Pilsner to Labatt's Blue because they were also the sponsor of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Now, Labatt at that time had the number 3 market share in the province of Ontario, behind Molson and O'Keefe. And so they wanted to improve their market share in Ontario, and they thought the easy way to do that would be to sponsor a sports broadcasting venture. And they ended up buying a piece of the team. So I don't think there was ever any serious talk of calling them the Maple Leafs. But that's how the name of the Blue Jays came to be.
Okay.
I put Sean's name in the chat if you want to.
Let's have a look.
He's a very clever writer.
Yeah. Anybody else have anything they want to ask?
Hey, Max, can you go more into the story of the Royals? You know, how they came up with the Royals, because I can understand with maybe some of the other teams why some, like the Padres and the Angels kept their names from the PCL teams. Mm-hmm. Some of the names were associated with the region or the city, like the Mariners and the Pilots. But can you go more into the story of the Royals, because I'm trying to figure out myself what the Royals have to do with the name the Royals have to do with Kansas City.
Well, there was a winter festival in Kansas City that was called the Royal Festival, and that's where the name came from.
Okay.
It was, as a matter of fact, it was a member of Scott's chapter who wrote the article about the Royals, and that was Joe Thompson.
Read more into that. Thanks.
Max, did you go, maybe someone else here has, but did you go to Exhibition Stadium and see games there?
I went to one game at Exhibition Stadium, my first game.
What was that like?
It was cold, even in the summer. The seats weren't facing the right way. You were far away from the action. But you know what? To a kid going to his first game, you wouldn't know the difference. I mean, that to me was live baseball for the first time. It was the Blue Jays and Minnesota. And I remember Juan Berenger was pitching for the Twins, and Jeff Musselman was pitching for the Blue Jays. The Twins had a very good game. They won by a score of 8-3. Steve Lombardozzi went 3 for 4, I believe. There was one home run that game. Fred McGriff hit a solo shot for the Jays, but it wasn't enough to overcome the Twins. And it was the year after the Twins won the World Series, so they had a pretty heavy lineup. They still had Kirby Puckett and Gary Gaetti. Danny Gladner was the leadoff hitter. Kent Herbeck, Tim Laudner. They were clearly the better team that night. The Blue Jays had Ernie Witt. The Blue Jays had Kelly Gruber, George Bell, Jesse Barfield. That was the year when the manager, Jimmy Williams, decided to stir up some controversy. Coming off George Bell's MVP year, he wanted to move George Bell to DH. They could move Lloyd Moseby to left field and put a rookie, Silvestre Campusano, in center field. And that created one of the most fractious clubhouses in team history.
When the Blue Jays came,
go ahead,
Francis.
When the Blue Jays moved, I can't remember. Were there already plans to have I guess then it was called the Sky Dome built? Or when they were created, rather?
Well, the Sky Dome was built. It opened in 1989, and I believe the plans to build it began in the early 80s. That Exhibition Stadium, I don't think was ever considered to be a long-term solution. It was just a question of where they were going to put the new stadium. There was some talk of putting it up where Downsview Airport is, at the congruence of 2 highways. And I think they wanted to bring more people downtown. I mean, downtown Toronto at that time was some abandoned warehouses alongside some railroad tracks. And there was not a lot going on there after the businesses closed down. Very different today. Well, very different before COVID, but very different situation now. I mean, there's restaurants and lofts, condominiums. I mean, downtown Toronto is alive. And now people want to live downtown because they work downtown. And after work, they have to have something to do. But that all began with the theaters and Skydome being built down there.
Where I do not know, where was Exhibition Stadium compared to downtown?
It was about a mile west of downtown. It was in on the grounds of the Canadian National Exhibition, which is a fair they have every year in August. Parking was always a problem, and getting in and out of the facility was not easy. It was not on a subway line, which
thank you.
Skydome is. And so it wasn't a very popular facility with the fans. It was more for football than for baseball.
So Max, if I could go back, you mentioned the clubhouse got fractious after the adjustments in the outfields and all that. Can you expand on that? I'm going to bite.
Oh, sure. It was just a question of some players sided with George Bell and some players sided with Jimmy Williams. And it was just.
So a bunch of people thought that Bell should still remain in the outfield and not be a DH?
Right. Particularly after he was coming off his MVP year.
Oh, okay.
And the disagreements in the clubhouse generated a very slow start by the Blue Jays. A month into the season, they were in 6th place. The year before, they actually missed the divisional title by a game or two against Detroit. They ended up getting hot right at the end of the season, but it did not look like a successful year for the Jays for a long time in 1988.
Max, I've been to 47 Major League ballparks.
Yep.
One of them was Exhibition Stadium in about summer of 1988 or 89.
Okay.
And I must say that's the worst baseball park I was ever in. And what struck me was it's sort of set out like a football stadium, but the stands on either side of what would have been a football field were not parallel to each other.
No.
It was more like not even a right angle, but like a parallelogram or something. Well, and the right field, there was just a fence out there, but it went forever. There was no stands beyond right field.
That's right. I think that the left field bleachers and the center field bleachers were built at different times. That's why they weren't parallel with one another. And there was only one major league facility that I was in, which I thought was worse than Exhibition Stadium. Exhibition Stadium was at least outside. The one that I thought was worse was the Kingdome.
Yeah.
Did you go to a game there?
Yeah, I saw Gaylord Perry pitch there.
Oh, yeah.
At the end of his career. And it was got to have been the loudest place I've ever been in, because it was an all concrete building.
Mm-hmm.
So the sound just bounced off all the concrete roof, dome, and everything else. The loudest place I've ever been in.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'll nominate the Dallas Stadium before they built, not the recent one, or the one before that, but the one before that, that was just basically a minor league park. That was pretty ugly and hot, very hot.
Well, I remember that was the last ballpark I visited about 2 years ago, last Major League ballpark on my list. And all I remembered was in Arlington, it's supposed to be halfway between Dallas and Fort Worth. So I went up top on the top deck and walked all around. And for sure, when you stand on the top deck and you look east, you could see the skyscrapers in downtown Dallas. And then when you walked around to the other side and looked west, you could see a lot smaller skyscrapers in downtown Fort Worth. That's all I remembered about the ballpark.
I have some pictures of what you're describing.
I was going to say, that's probably the best part you saw of the ballpark. Everything else is downhill from there.
Yeah.
What's
Max,
stuck in my mind.
Yeah.
are there any plans to do any upgrades or improvements to the Sky Dome?
They did in 2005. They had a renovation.
Anything since then planned?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, there may be some superficial upgrades, but that was the big one. When they replaced the scoreboard, they replaced the turf. That was when the Blue Jays bought the stadium. They bought the stadium from Skydome Corporation. That's when the name changed from Skydome to the Rogers Center. Mm-hmm. And as part of the deal, they got a $210 million shopping spree, which they wasted. They spent all their money on guys like A.J. Burnett and B.J. Ryan. They gave Vernon Wells a ridiculous contract extension, which he never lived up to. But yeah, that was when the big renovation took place. And I don't think there's much in the budget for another renovation coming up.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Is Skydome on the subway line?
Yes, it is.
I've been to Exhibition Stadium, but I haven't been to Skydome, which is one of the about 6 or 7 ballparks I haven't been to. But I don't have a passport because mine expired 20 years ago. Never got around to renew it. But back then, you didn't need a passport or anything to go between the United States and Canada. But now you do, I guess.
That's right. There was a time you didn't, and that changed depending on how you traveled and the temperament of the border guard. Anywhere between 2001 and 2009. I can remember if you flew, they wanted you to have a passport, but if you drove, sometimes they'd be lenient with you. But yeah, the Skydome or Rogers Center is on the, it's right by Union Station, which is the central train station downtown. And then there's a skywalk. There's a sort of a bridge that takes you from there to the ballpark. It's about a 10-minute walk, and you're right there.
So my dilemma is, what is it now? $200 to get a passport? Do I want to pay $200 and take 6 months to get a passport in order to go to see exhibition or Skydome, see a ball game there?
Well, I guess the question is, how badly do you want to see a game there?
Right.
Well, you're a SABR member. You're supposed to do crazy things like that.
Right.
Hey, Max, I got a question about Pat Gillick. What was it like to watch him grow and develop Toronto from a team that didn't start out so well into the team that became the success in the 80s and the early part of the 90s? What was it like to watch that? What was it like to watch that?
Well, it was slow going at first. I mean, the Jays farm system did yield some great players, but not right away. It was around 1983 that the Jays finally became a contender. I mean, from 1977 to 1980, they averaged 56 wins a season. From 1983 to 1993, they averaged 91 wins a season. And they made some really good use of the Rule 5 draft. They in 10 seasons, selected 6 players who each played 10 years in the major leagues in the Rule 5 draft. One of them was George Bell. One of them was Willie Upshaw. One of them was Kelly Gruber. And it was definitely exciting. I mean, the drive of 85 was the first time that they actually won their division. And then the expectations grew. And 87 was when they lost the Tigers that last weekend of the season. 89, they won the division again, but lost to Oakland. 91, they won the division again and lost to Minnesota. 92, they finally won a championship series and the World Series. And that was exciting. That was when the Blue Jays had cemented their status as Canada's team from the Expos. When the Blue Jays first became a team, I mean, the Expos were the only team in the country, so they were sort of the national team. But then in 1980, the Expos had this big television contract which covered the entire country. The Blue Jays claimed successfully that their television market was being infringed. And so basically anything from Toronto West was sort of isolated from the Expos by virtue of geography. But it was very exciting to watch the Jays develop and mature into a contending ball club. And Pat Gillick was really into scouting and had it in the budget, and it paid off. And then mid-90s, I mean, there were a few things that happened, and Gillick retired in the middle of the strike. He came back to go to the Orioles and a few other teams, but they really lost their momentum, and they had a difficult time getting it back after that.
Yeah, because I noticed that now that they've got all this influx of great young players, and they seem to tap into the sons of Major League Baseball players market, as part of that success. And speaking from somebody, look, I was, as a Phillies fan, we've been on the wrong end because we lost Bell in the Rule 5 draft, which cost Howie Bedell his job. And I can also remember the dead silence watching because I was a student at the time when Joe Carter hit the home run. I can remember the dead silence in the building where I was at school when Carter hit it. So been on the wrong end, both of those. But on the other hand, I was able to get a chance to see as a Phillies fan when Gillick came to Philadelphia and help be able to get them to that next step as far as getting them to the World Series in 2008. So a little bit on both ends, but Bobby Cox, I have to say, I know when Roy Hartsfield, when he wore out his welcome there in terms of not winning, but how are they able to get Bobby Cox? Considering how they're able to get him, and he played a hell of a role in as far as them managing the team in the 80s.
Well, that was the Yankees connection. I mean, Bobby Cox had come to the Braves from the Yankees. He was a Yankees player and had managed in their farm system. Gillick had come from the Yankees, where he was Gillick had actually come from the Astros to the Yankees when Tal Smith became the general manager, and he was the director of scouting or something. And then when the Blue Jays became a team, he became vice president of baseball operations. And between him coming from the Yankees and Peter Bavasi coming from the Dodgers, a lot of the early player personnel, and in fact, a lot of the players came from those two organizations. You mentioned Roy Hartsfield's name. He was a manager in the Dodgers farm system. In fact, Peter Bavasi, as a joke, when he was working in the front office for Albuquerque in the 60s, said, when I become a major league general manager, Roy, you're going to be my manager. And that was the reason he got hired. And Bobby Cox had been fired as manager of the Braves in 1981. He was available. And at the time, the Blue Jays manager was he was about 68 years old, Bobby Maddock. It was time for him to retire. And Cox was available, and he came to manage the team. He brought with Cito Gaston, the hitting coach, who later became the manager. And it was a genius role looking back, or a genius move looking back, getting Bobby Cox.
Thank you. Yeah, I forgot about Bobby Maddox. Sorry about that.
If the 94 strike hadn't occurred and the Expos, who had the best team that year, had gone all the way and won the World Series, would that have saved the team, and would they be the dominant team in Canada now?
In a word, no. The problems that the Expos encountered, if they had completed the season, if they had won the World Series, which we'll never know if that would have happened, those problems weren't going away. The Expos actually lost less money not playing the last 2 months of the season than they would have playing the full season, because they would have had to pay their players and maintain the stadium and so forth, and the revenue coming in wouldn't have been sufficient to budget for that. They still had a very unpopular stadium, which nobody wanted to go to. The same week that they canceled the World Series, Quebec elected a sovereignist government, which their aim was to form an independent country and destroy Canada. In 1995, it nearly happened. A lot of players didn't want to play in Montreal because of the taxes. A lot of players didn't want to play because of the language and the climate. I mean, there were all sorts of reasons besides the strike why the Expos failed. It's a nice story, the story of, they would have gone all the way had they not canceled the season, but as far as I can see, there isn't a lot of validity to it.
Might be something for one of those books on alternate realities.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I could see economically, if they can't have a TV contract that only goes as far west as the eastern suburbs of Toronto, you're not going to be able to compete with the Maple Leafs, who've got all of Canada west of Toronto, right?
Well, that I think more than anything was what killed the Expos, was that TV contract. Because when that contract expired in 1985, that was with Carling O'Keefe Beer. They didn't want to renew because they lost too much money. And so they had a much less lucrative television contract with Labatt. And a lot of the revenue that the Expos needed to run their franchises just wasn't coming in anymore.
What is the population of Quebec?
Province of Quebec's about 10 million.
And of course, the eastern provinces, I would not assume there's a large population there either.
No, there's not. There's Prince Edward Island. I don't even think there's 100,000 people living there. New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, maybe 1 million each. And then Ontario is about 15 million.
And of course, how many people from northern New York State or Vermont or New Hampshire would go to, who are the baseball fans, would go to Expo games?
Oh, particularly if their local team was in town. Oh, they draw a lot of fans from Vermont and from upstate New York. And I can remember when they'd be playing the Mets, you'd see as many Mets hats as you would Expos hats. That one interleague series against the Red Sox, there were tons of people with coming from New England. Anybody else? We done?
Everybody okay?
Thanks a lot, Max.
Thanks for
Max,
coming
wonderful.
out, everybody.
Yes, thank you. It's very enjoyable.
Thank you very much.
All right, appreciate it, Max.
All right.
See you guys. I guess for those who come to the next one, it'll be the 18th for lunch, and then in December we'll have 2 presentations and then 1 kind of virtual holiday party.
So nothing on the 11th.
Nothing on 11, not this month. No. Enjoy Veterans Day.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's right.
So.
And thanks everybody for the questions and the discussion.
Very enjoyable, Max. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me, Pete.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everybody.
See you next time.
All right, guys.
Stay safe.
Have a good night.
You
Be
too.
well.
Bye.
Stay safe.